All right. Hey, everyone. Happy solar eclipse. I'm really excited about today. This is the first live recording I'm doing for the group Rooted in Abundance. So this is an amazing time for me, but we're going to go ahead and get right into it because that's what I do. I get right into it. So, I just want us to know that today isn't about, it's not a training and it's not a webinar. It's just us coming together to do the work. Um, and the work is shadow work. It's just us coming together to do the work to get ready for this solar eclipse, to prepare for this solar eclipse. So, what we're doing is we're going to go over what today means astrologically. We're going to go over what it means for each rising sign. And then we are going to do some shadow work, which is the meat, which is the part I like. We're going to do some, hey, Andrea. And then if anybody wants to participate in maybe a card pull, then we'll do that. But today is all about identifying our visibility and our vulnerability wounds. All right. So I want to start with the zodiac sign Leo. And Leo is a zodiac sign. That's where the solar eclipse is. And Leo represents our creative self expression, but it also it represents our divine authority, so our authority that we get from God, and it represents our ancestral authority, and that's authority that we have inherited from our ancestors. So when I say your divine authority, I mean it's just wherever it is in your chart, whatever house Leo is in, it shows where you have the most like natural authority, the most natural type of leadership. And for me, because I'm Capricorn rising, where I have the most natural authority is in my eighth house. So that's things that have to do with ancestors. That's why I'm so deep into hoodoo. That's things that have to do with shadow work. That's why I love shadow work and journaling. Things that have to do with understanding what's underneath the surface. And that's why I love doing things like magic and tarot and astrology, anything that's occultish. That's what I love doing. That's where my natural authority is. So you want to be reflecting if you know the house that your Leo is in, kind of be reflecting on things that you just automatically feel like you have some type of leadership in, some type of authority in. Okay. Let me see what I have said here. Ninth house. So for Andrea, for you, if you have your Leo's in the ninth house, so the ninth house represents long distance travel. We talked about that. It's not always going to be like physical travel, but it could be things like meditation, transcendental meditation, any type of meditation that takes you someplace, any place you can go spiritual journeys. um the ninth house represents your purpose. So your purpose is something that you might have a lot of authority in, or helping people identify their purpose. Um, what else? Ninth house is it represents places where you participate in higher learning and higher education. So just things like that. Um, my incense getting ashes on my notes. But so that's what the zodiac sign Leo represents. Okay, now in the zodiac sign Leo is where we have the sun, which was creating the solar eclipse and the new moon. So the sun is the planet. We'll call it a planet. It's really a star, but the sun is the planet that rules Leo. So it has a lot of the same meanings of having authority, leadership, things like that. But wherever the sun is, when it's transiting, it illuminates where it wants us to focus for the month. So it's been in Leo, it's in Leo right now. So it's illuminating what it wants us to focus on, and that is Leo related things. And it's because the sun is in its own sign, the energy of Leo is extremely strong. And so wherever the sun is in your chart, that also shows where you shine. I just wanted to bring that out too. Now the also in Leo, we have the moon. And the moon is in its shadow phase. Rahu and Ketu, or the north node and the south node of the moon, they create shadows wherever they are. That's what creates the eclipse and eclipses things out. And when the moon is with the sun, it's in the shadow phase because you can't see the moon. If you were to go out and try to find the moon tonight or whenever there's a new moon, you won't be able to see it because uh, the moon gets its light from the sun. But when the moon is at the exact same degree as the sun, and it's at 20 degrees today during the solar eclipse, when it's really close to the sun, you can't see the reflection of the moon. And that is our cue to go ahead and do shadow work, and get really serious about it, especially during the eclipses. Because when we're doing shadow work, um, for the new moon, then we're reflecting on the last month. But for eclipse season, when we do shadow work, we're reflecting on the last 6 months. Okay. So we are definitely doing some shadow work today. And let me see. And you're yeah, so the shadow work we're going to be doing, just so we can get in the right mindset, is what has been coming up in the last 6 months concerning your creative self-expression and concerning your divine or your ancestral authority. What has been coming up for you that you noticed? Okay. So what another thing that's creating this eclipse is the south node of the moon, or K2, that's in 0 degrees of Virgo. So when a planet or point or asteroid is at 0 degrees, then it carries the energy of two different signs. So it carries the energy, well, because the south node goes backwards. South node and Rahu, or the south node and the north node, they are always in the energy of retrograde. So it's carrying the energy of Virgo that is coming out of, and it's starting to connect with the energy of Leo. So it has both of those energies going along with it. So the south node that is creating, oh, well, yeah. So yeah, the same thing with your sun. It has both energies of the sun and Virgo. I forgot that it was at 0 degrees. Okay. Um, so with the South Node is asking us to release and cut away things. So the things that could cause us to, and Andrea is here. So Andrea has been talking about in her group where she does human design and she human design and astrology, and I'm missing something, but she really works with that, and she's been talking about how we have to overcome perfectionism and performing gene keys. Yep, I always forget gene keys. How we have to overcome perfectionism and performing, and that is what perfectionism is, what Virgo is bringing out, what we need to release, because when we're talking about our spiritual gifts, we want to just express those. We want to be skilled and we want to be knowledgeable and we want to know what we're talking about. We want to know what we're doing, but we really have to leave perfectionism alone And that energy of perfectionism comes out strong in the zodiac sign Virgo. So that's what we need to release. Something else that comes out in the zodiac sign Virgo, and this is where the South Node has been for the last 18 months. So you might have been getting subtle or not so subtle nudges for the last 18 months to let go of control and perfectionism. And the another thing is being stuck in your head when it comes to certain things, because Virgo will bring that out in you too. It's kind of, you get stuck in your head about things and keep turning your wheels and turning your wheels, and you're stuck in here when you need to be expressing. That's what Leo wants us to do. It wants us to express. Okay. So now, where we're talking about the energy of 0 degrees of right. Right. If you have a stellium Virgo, you have all types of energies that will keep you stuck in your head. Um, the stelliums are difficult, what can be difficult if you don't know how to deal with them just anyway. But if they're in Virgo, oh my God. So um okay, so something else with the south node of the moon going into Leo, this is the core of what we're talking about, is Leo is an entertainer. Leo is a performer. Leo loves to be seen. Um, but Leo is all about the heart, okay? Expressing what's on your heart, expressing what's in your heart. And where with K2 being there, it's reminding us to pay attention to the times where we were visible, being seen, entertaining, and we got wounded from those experiences, or the times when we were vulnerable with our emotions and vulnerable with what we felt, vulnerable with our heart, and we experienced wounds there. So now's the time to release those experiences so that we can have the confidence that we need to express our spiritual gifts that we've been given. Okay. So moving on, we um also in Leo, but this is not a tight conjunction because I believe Jupiter is at 9 degrees of Leo, and that these are just planets that are in Leo. They're not conjunct to the solar eclipse. So Jupiter is at 9 degrees of Leo, and Jupiter is a teacher. Jupiter is a guru, right? So, but also Jupiter is all about expansion and expansiveness. Jupiter's going to just moved into Leo, so it's going to be there for a while. So we want to think about how can we expand in our spiritual gifts, whatever that might mean to you, whether it's gaining more wisdom or whether that's teaching more wisdom. How do we expand? Another way you can expand is maybe you go from just having the wisdom for yourself to teaching it to other people, to think about getting paid for your wisdom. Okay. Um, Jupiter is about having a vision, and Jupiter is about creating a strategy. So, something that you can think about is when it comes to my spiritual gifts and expressing my spiritual gifts, what is my vision for it? This might be something you want to ask yourself. We're talking about spiritual gifts. This might be something that you want to ask your ancestors. How can I expand the vision that I have for myself concerning my spiritual gifts? Or, whoever, this is a good time to ask a higher power, whatever one you feel most connected to. Another thing that you can do is understand that Mercury is at 5 degrees of Leo. Again, it's not conjunct, but it's just in the same sign. So Mercury is at 5 degrees of Leo right now, and it's aspecting Pluto in Aquarius. So we have Mercury, which represents communication and short distance travel and information. It's also a learning and teaching type of planet. And it's aspecting retrograde Pluto in Aquarius. And retrograde Pluto is having us to reflect on the possibly traumatic times we were being different. This is Aquarius being out of the box, being different, and we experienced some type of trauma from that. This is not a time to, with Pluto, you can't hide from your pain. You can't hide from your wounds. With Pluto, you have to be real and honest about it in order for any type of change or transformation to happen. So where that's on our, this could be on our mind, the times when we allowed ourselves to be vulnerable and we allowed ourselves to be visible, but because it might not have looked like how everybody else thought it should have looked like, then we could have experienced some type of trauma from that, some type of wounding from that. So that's also something to think about. Okay. So now we're moving out of the astrology. There's also, let me just say this while I'm about to go look at the rising signs and what this could mean for each rising sign. There's a very loose, it's not a tight trine, it's a 5-degree trine. Retrograde Saturn is making a loose 5-degree trine to the solar eclipse. And what that means is, oh, I'm glad I brought up Saturn. But what that means is it's causing us to reflect on where we need to create more, a stronger foundation, or create a system, create more discipline, more responsibility around expressing our spiritual gifts. Okay? We have to be more responsible for them. Imagine having a gift and not being responsible for it. Like, have you ever given somebody something and they weren't responsible for it? Like, our gifts aren't something we created. They were given to us. Like I said, Leo represents your divine authority, your authority that was given to you by your ancestors that were here before you. So you don't want to just be irresponsible with it. You don't want to not be creating more discipline and putting more effort to it and being more disciplined around it. I think I already said that. So another thing, and that's why I said I'm glad I mentioned Saturn, because Saturn, the trine to Saturn, and then the south node of the moon coming out of Virgo have similar meanings, because Virgo is about creating systems or SOPs. It's about managing. It's about time management. And so when we're thinking about our spiritual gifts that we've been given, our divine authority, we want to be thinking about how can we make sure we have a system to express our spiritual gifts or our divine authority consistently, and have a system, not sporadically, not when you think about it, not when you feel like you should, but some type of system to make sure you're staying consistent with being skilled about it and expressing it. Okay. Now, for if you have Aries in your first house, then this solar eclipse, it is just about everything I talked about, because you have like a triple a triple effect. You have the sun that rules Leo in your fifth house that is ruled by the sun in Leo. So it's really a strong, and everything I said already um already reflects to you. Okay. So that's Aries rising with the, but you might have a vulnerability or wound or visibility wound around just um being judged for your creative expressions, or for your spiritual gift, whatever it is. Uh, fear of being seen. You just don't want to be seen, and you could have experienced, depending on how your fifth house looks, what's aspecting it. Um, a real trauma around um vulnerability, and the fifth house can represent it represents children too. So that's something to think about. I just thought about that. It could we want to make sure that you're not passing anything down to your kids when it comes to visibility and vulnerability. You want to make sure that you're healing your inner child. The fifth house is your inner child, can represent your inner child. So your visibility and vulnerability wound could have been established in childhood. And that's something that you need to work on moving forward. And we're going to dig more into this with the shadow work. But if you have Taurus in your first house, then the solar eclipse is in your fourth house of your emotions, your family, and your home. So this is another time, another connection to not feeling like it's safe to um, express your spiritual gifts or express who you are with your family. Okay. And you could have understood it at an early age. Well, if it's not safe for me to express my feelings and express myself, um, and show my whatever, because we don't have just divine authority as adults. If we have divine authority on something, we have it. It don't matter how old we are. So, um, you're like, well, if I can't express myself to the people who are supposed to love me, to the people I live with, then I know I can't express myself in the public. I can't express myself to people on the outside. So that's also a wound that could be really close to home. If you have Gemini in your first house, then your voice, and I know this, I have people who are close to me who are Gemini rising, and their voice, whenever they want to speak, um, has really, they've have really strong, deep wounds around just them speaking. Because the solar eclipse is going to be in your third house. That's where Leo is. Okay. So the third house represents your voice, how you communicate. And when you communicate, guess what? With Leo there, you communicate with authority. Everybody around you is not going to like that. Some people are going to tell you have too much authority. They're going to tell you to be quiet, to dumb it down. Um, for women, you might get that you need to be more feminine, speak less, speak quieter. Um, so overcoming wounds like that of being vulnerable in what you communicate, because that can be used against you. That can be turned against you. Being being visible when you communicate. Again, you just get that strong energy around shh. I don't want to sing the rest of that song, but you might just feel like that. So um that's not a cue. Don't listen to that, because everybody who is Gemini, if you're Gemini rising, you already know you're supposed to be communicating. But your authority is in how you communicate and what you communicate. So that's definitely something to overcome. If you have Cancer in your first house, I'm a Cancer moon, so this is for me too. Um, you have a worth wound, okay? And your visibility wound might come up in you might feel like your gifts or what you express or what you have to express is not valuable enough to express. About to get me emotional. It might make you feel like you're not what you have to share is not valuable enough. Like you need to work more on it. You need to develop more skills. You need to just be more talented. Um, so you might feel like you might get rejected because your gift isn't strong enough, your gift isn't talented enough, you're not talented enough. And you might just be in a phase of, because I noticed that's where I was, just in a phase of always trying to, I know I want to share this and I'm excited about sharing this, but I feel like I need to get more information or gain more skills so that I feel like I can be worthy of sharing it. Or this also comes into play with pricing, because Leo would be in your second house of worth and money. Okay. So if you have Leo in your first house, then this could be a strong wound around who you are, just expressing who you are as a person, expressing your purpose. That you could have wounds around just expressing who you are. Um, just you being seen. And it's deeper than it is also your spiritual gifts. It's also your creative self-expression. But if you have Leo in your first house, it's just you. You might have wounds about expressing who you are, being who you are, showing who you are. And that's what needs to be addressed and what needs to be worked on. Um, if you have Virgo rising, and I talked to somebody in my Instagram comments yesterday, she was a Virgo rising and she had her moon in her Leo in her 12th house. So the solar eclipse is going to be in your 12th house. And the 12th house is our secret place, our sacred place. The 12th house represents isolation. Um, so it's similar to Leo rising, but you just might feel way more comfortable practicing your spiritual gifts, and expressing your spiritual gifts by yourself, when you're alone by yourself in isolation, because there's a struggle with Virgo in your first house, feeling like you need to perform perfection, or feeling like you need to show to the world that you're perfect, and it's hard for you to just express your real raw self. So there's a wound in the things that you try to hide and try to keep secret. Um, you might hold it so close, hold your creativity. Like, you're the type of person that you might practice magic or practice tarot or study astrology and not tell nobody. You might love it to your core, but you just don't want to tell nobody because it's so special to you, it's so sacred to you. You don't want to share it, and you don't want it to be judged, and you just want to keep it to yourself. But you have to express those you have to express those gifts. You can't keep your divine authority or your gifts that were given to you to yourself. um but you also might have to take breaks and just be to yourself so you can recharge. But what I told her was, um the deep feelings, because the 12th house represents your psychological psychological thoughts and your deep feelings. That's the 12th house. So your gift could be transmuting those deep feelings, those deep emotions into whatever you want, because emotions are magic to me. I'm Scorpio stellium, so transmuting and transforming, that's me, that's how I work. But um and also you might want to, a gift you could have is transmuting your deep emotions into art, some type of art. And with the 12th house, the art that you do is not it's not just any old kind of art. It's not like surface level art. It's art that you create like with the deepest part of your heart and soul. It's art that has really deep and strong meaning. So um the example I use sometimes with the art that you can create from the 12th house is like a surface level art could be like a TV show, right? But with a 12th house deep, really deep, meaning you could be talking about like a Broadway play, not even a movie, but like something real deep, something like um, a surface level book could be, you know, any old type of book, but like a 12th house book could be like a really long, deep novel with fantasy characters and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, turning your emotions and transmuting your emotions into magic, transmuting your emotions into art that really means something. But also, the 12th house, since we're talking about it meaning a place where you can isolate, it's an isolated place. Um, Another isolated place that's associated with the 12th house is hospitals. So the 12th house has a connection with healing. Leo has a connection with healing. Um, so your divine authority could have something to do with healing. Your spiritual gift could have something to do with healing. So um that's a wound that you really want to focus on. And it's possible that as you heal with Virgo rising, as you heal your visibility and vulnerability wounds, you could help others heal as well. All right. Um, if you have Libra in your 12th house, then you can have a wound around belonging because Leo is in your 11th house of large network circles. Okay. And like associates, and it has on some level friendships, maybe not deep friendships with the 11th house, but some type of relationships, especially if you have Libra in your first house. Relationships mean a lot to you. So you might feel like, if I express my spiritual gifts, if I show my spiritual gifts and I'm vulnerable with them, then my circles, my friends, my associates might reject me. Or maybe you did get rejected. Um, those are wounds that need to be looked at. Okay. Um, Scorpio rising. If you have Scorpio in your first house, then that means you have Leo in your 10th house, and your 10th house is the public. Um, and so you might feel like when if you have Scorpio rising and the 10th house is important to you, people who are in authority over you, your authority figures, they're going to mean a lot to you when it comes to how you express yourself, how you express your spiritual gifts. You might think about, well, what are my parents going to say? What is my boss going to say? What are my teachers going to say? What are they going to think? Anybody who has anyone who's an authority figure over you, that might um that might restrict how you feel like you want to express who you are and express your spiritual gifts to. You might feel like you don't have the authority to express the gifts that you want to express. So you might have some hesitation and feel like, well, people are going to say, I don't know enough. I'm not the authority on this, or I'm not the expert on this, so I shouldn't be expressing this. I shouldn't be showing this. You might have wounds around that. So that's something that you need to think about. But also fear of being seen, a wound around being seen as the authority. That might trip you up. Like being seen as the person who does have authority in certain spiritual gifts. That might trip you up. So those are things that need to be addressed. All right. The same thing with Sagittarius rising. Um, with the ninth house, like I was saying, the ninth house is ruled by Jupiter. So there's a lot of being seen as the guru, because Jupiter is the guru. So you might have wounds around feeling like you need permission to teach what you're teaching, to express what you're expressing. You might feel like you have to have permission. And in some cases, you might you have to, well, in all cases, you have to give yourself the permission. Um you might have to go on that journey alone to understand that you do have the authority to share what you want to share and express what you want to express. Um, so that's Sagittarius rising. With Capricorn rising, okay, Capricorn rising, the legitimacy wound might show up. And that is where you might feel like, because everything, the eighth house is where the solar eclipse is going to be. And with the eighth house, everything is underneath the surface. And when things are underneath the surface, they're not easily seen. And what we have to do, if you're a Capricorn rising, is have the confidence to bring the hidden things up to the surface. And there could be a lot of, I know me myself, I have had wounds in the things that were eighth house ish that I tried to be visible in at first, or that I tried to share and be vulnerable in, like, hey y'all, I'm into tarot now, or I'm into astrology now, or um I'm learning more about this or that. And then you try to express it to people, especially the people that you're close with the eighth house, that's the people that you're intimate with, like family members, really, really, I'll just say family members, or even it could be the people that you're married to. When you try to be visible in it or just be vulnerable and share it, bring those things that are hidden up to the surface. Oh my God, the problems people will have. So you might have wounds around that. But it's important to overcome those wounds, and that's what I have done. And it's been one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. And it's not to say that it was easy, it wasn't easy, but it's just having that knowing with, if you're a Capricorn, you just know things. And it's just having that knowing that I'm supposed to move forward with this. All right. With Aquarius rising, that means you have the solar eclipse in your seventh house of relationships. Um, so it could be that you have wounds when you share or express your visibility or vulnerability concerning your spiritual gifts. Your wounds could be just being seen. Again, just being is similar to Leo rising, because they're opposite signs, so they share a lot of similar traits. But it's really being seen for who you are, for expressing who you are in your spiritual gifts, expressing those things in your relationships, and just being vulnerable in your relationships. Because, Aquarius, they're a little different, but they're also ruled by Saturn. And when you're ruled by Saturn, you can be kind of standoffish with people already, because Saturn restricts and it limits. And so they say with Aquarius, it's like you love people, you're a humanitarian, you want to help people, but also you want people to leave you alone so you can do that. So there's already some issues where you might feel standoffish with people, also because Aquarius, you do things differently. So there's already an issue of maybe being misunderstood or being rejected because you're just different anyway, you know. So being and expressing who you are in your relationships, that could be a wound. Um, and finally, with uh, Aquarius rising, the solar eclipse is in your sixth house, and You could have wounds around giving and just giving too much. Okay. So in your authority, it's like in the sixth house, you feel for the vulnerable. You feel you want to help people, you want to be a service to people, you want to help people heal. But you can give too much. So you're the type of person who, like, if your spiritual gift is counseling, you could just be talking and talking and talking to people all day, and they can be draining all your energy. And you can have wounds around that, wounds around people taking advantage of your desire to just give and give and give. So your wound could be around just feeling and being taken advantage of when you actually show or express your spiritual gifts. People try to use them. People don't want to pay if you charge. They'll just drain you and use you up, basically. So you want to make sure that you are being aware of that. Okay. So now that's the rising signs and the wounds that we all might be experiencing. Now we're getting to the meat. Okay. So this is where we go to the shadow work around your vulnerability. I wanted to do the rising signs first so you can have some type of idea to hold on to while we're doing this shadow work of vulnerability wounds that might show up. The wounds that I talked about might not show up in the exact way that I mentioned them, but you might see some type of connection. What I want us to do is identify your wound and put your own name to it. Don't try to think of a psychology word that you might have heard on the internet or reading a book of what a specific wound is. You don't have to know um the exact textbook word for whatever your visibility or vulnerability wound is. Just write whatever has the deepest connection with you. So first we're going to think about when you express yourself, your spiritual gifts, when you actually express them, or even if you just think about expressing them, what is the fear or resistance that triggers you into maybe not expressing in the way that you would like or not expressing at all? What is the trigger for you? And let's take some. We're doing the work, so I'm just gonna take some time, drink a little coffee. What is the trigger? All right. Um. Now, when you get triggered, what is the story that you tell yourself? Let me think about what my trigger would be so I can give an example. So, because I have Saturn really strong in my I have Saturn really strong in my chart. It's my Atma Karka. I have Capricorn rising. So Saturn rules my chart, Saturn rules my life. And Saturn can represent humiliation. And when I was younger, I used to sing and dance all the time. All the time. And what I realized um would trigger me is the feeling of humiliation, because that's something that Saturn can represent, humiliation. And so I would practice. Like I'm practicing my songs, I'm practicing my dances. I didn't start really doing public speaking until I got older. Was still that's still what I think about even now when I think about public speaking is I don't want to embarrass myself. I don't want to humiliate myself. And so that's the trigger for me, is being humiliated or embarrassed. Um, and so the story that I would tell myself would be well, you just can't you can't do it again. If you get that's what I would tell myself, I'm just not doing it again. If I embarrassed, if I'm singing or dancing somewhere and I'm humiliated, well, that's it for me. I'm not doing it again because I don't want to be humiliated. I don't want to embarrass myself. Um, so that's the story. And okay, what happens if I get humiliated or embarrassed? What happens? What you just gonna stop doing what you love doing? You just gonna stop performing? Um, no. That's why I used to tell myself, but did I stop? No. Um, so what is the story that you tell yourself when um you get triggered? For some people, it could be well, um, I think I heard a lady use this example where she was talking about her trigger was raising her hand in school. And her fear was if I raise my hand in school and I try to answer the question and the question is wrong, then everyone's going to think I'm stupid. So I'm not going to raise my hand and answer questions in school so I don't look like I am ignorant. But the reality of the fact is sometimes you're gonna get questions right, sometimes you're gonna get them wrong. But what's the story that you tell yourself? Okay. Moving on is once you understand what your triggers are and the story, what's going on inside your head when you're being triggered, then you want to understand that part of shadow work is not saying, okay, well now let me make a 5-step plan to fix these triggers right now. It's something that you have to do constantly in the moment. Okay. So what you have to do is acknowledge your fears, acknowledge the story that you tell yourself, and acknowledge those triggers. And in the moment, how you integrate the truth, the telling your truth about those triggers, telling your truth about the story that you play in your head when you're being triggered, is to when you notice it happening, do the opposite consistently. Do what you know you're supposed to do consistently. You don't succumb to the triggers. You don't agree with the story. You do what you know you're supposed to do no matter what. Okay. And it only comes through action. It does not come through you creating some type of 5-step plan. It only comes through you actively changing consistently. And that's it. Okay. So um I don't know if anyone wants to share their vulnerability wounds or their visibility wounds. Hopefully that helped. Um, and so we are winding down. I said that we will pull some tarot, but I don't know if anyone wanted to go deeper with some tarot. So, but I think we'll kind of just leave the tarot alone for right now. And I want you to, if you feel comfortable, oh yes, please. Okay. What did you want a tarot pull for what the solar eclipse might mean for you? Okay. All right, let's see. All right, Andrea, what does the solar eclipse mean for Andrea? While I'm shuffling these cards, I noticed that sometimes people um we're talking about performing, and I used to notice like if you're looking at tarot, people who do tarot online, they shuffle, boom, 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 and then pull a card real fast. But I have to connect with the cards before I start pulling and getting information. So like I stop shuffling when the cards tell me to stop, or well, I feel like I need to stop. And that is something that I had to overcome too, because like people going to think that you don't know what you're doing if you take a long time to shuffle. But I'm like, I don't want to rush anything. I want the cards and the energy to tell me when to stop. So that's something I had to overcome too. What does a solar eclipse mean for Andrew? All right. Okay. This is the Nine of Wands. Let's see what this means. I want to get a little deeper understanding of what it means. I feel like it's putting down some, like putting a lot of things down, putting things down. That's what I feel like. Let me so please clarify what this Nine of Wands means. Like the energy that you have concerning like being defensive, any type of defensiveness, any type of heavy burdens around sharing your um spiritual gifts, whatever they might look like. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like just putting the burden down. You don't have to be defensive. Your spiritual gift is what it is. It is what it is. You don't have to defend it. It just is what it is. It was given to you. You don't have to defend it. Please clarify the Nine of Wands. Take it up with God. Take it up with the ancestors. They gave it to me. And who am I to tell them I can't? All right, Queen of Cups reverse. For me, I feel like that might be your moon. Eight of Wands. Oh, Eight of Wands. Yep. It's like stepping back from that Nine of Wands energy where like you're protecting yourself, you're defending yourself. It's a heavy burden that you might be carrying that you need to put down. And the Eight of Wands is like really fast energy that's moving quickly. And so it's like releasing that energy, saying giving the messages that you're getting, um, sharing the messages that you're getting. And yep, Nine of Swords. This is anxiety. Letting go of that. And for me, this could be that Virgo stellium kind of showing up, um, blocking a little bit because Virgo has a lot to do with anxiety. And I think don't you have Saturn in Leo? Saturn is anxiety as well. Um, so it's releasing that anxiety so you can give the message. But also this Queen of Cups, she was reversed. And so it's for me, this is like a codependence card. Um, but the Queen of Cups, if she's upright, she and you see she has a full cup. So she's spiritual, she's a healer. She but when she's this way, she's can be codependent. And so like what she can be attached to things or to people emotionally, and that attachment can make her depend on the person or the group of people more than the spiritual gift. Um, so it's turning it up, filling yourself up with what you need, whatever you need emotionally to feel okay, to express your spiritual gifts, to share your spiritual gifts, and to share the messages that you feel like you need to share. Fill yourself up with that so you can be the healer that you need to be, so you can let go of the anxiety, so you can feel like you don't have to defend yourself or get permission, like you said, and you can just share the messages. Share the messages. Um, that's what I feel like this solar eclipse is going to mean for you in general overall. I know that was a quick read. Hopefully it resonated and made sense. But yeah, that is what I have. This was supposed to be 30 minutes. I ended up talking for an hour, speaking to you and like my name. So yep, definitely. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. just and then the more you reflect on, what do you need to feel like you can let down the put the anxiety down and put the defensiveness now down, like pour it into yourself. Like, I don't want to say drowning yourself with it, but yeah, really giving it to yourself. Feed your emotions, so you're not just pouring them out. So that, did you want to get off the mic and say something, or are you? Oh, not you by the tree.
Yeah, yeah. I came out of the house. I said, I'm coming out to sit and by the tree in greenery. Yes, to listen to what you've had to say. Now, this has been very, very powerful. Um, and when you mentioned about like the need for permission to teach my spiritual gifts, that's exactly. And I wrote down, I have the authority. Exactly what you
Mm-hmm.
said. So yeah, it's just. And like I said, when you said, what do I need? And I said, I need people like yourself because we like speak the same language and it's not looking at me sideways like what are you talking about, that kind of thing. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that's what. And you said about the people, I think you said mention something about surrounding yourself, like the people that you're around. Something you said something about people, I can't remember in what that context you used it in, but I feel like some of the people that I'm around don't understand the work that I do. And I feel like that,
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't use it as an excuse to stop me, but that's my what I'm putting up as a guard, my anxiety, like you said, and that whole Virgo, stellium, perfectionist. And when you mentioned about being a guru, like I'm not a guru though, but I am in
Girl.
my own.
Nuh-uh.
But I am. But they don't know that. They
Yeah.
don't look at me. They would you look at me as a guru, and I really appreciate that. But they don't, and so that's for me that they don't see me. Like
Yeah.
they don't see me.
Mm.
So I feel
Wow.
like that's what I've got to just put the blinkers on. I feel like it's a bit like when I was doing bodybuilding and people didn't understand that a black woman with muscles. It's that I had to put my blinkers on and just go where I needed to go
Mm-hmm.
and train, and that's how I became a British champion. So it's like I need to become the British champion of the work that I do. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And what I was talking about was the Queen of Cups being reversed, and sometimes that can give us a codependent type of energy,
mm,
and where we connect emotionally with people more than we're connecting emotionally with ourselves or the gifts that we need to share.
yeah.
So yeah,
That
so I
that
see
was it.
why, yeah, why you said we're saying that just connecting more with people who you can express to emotionally, who understand where you're going, what you're trying to do, that would help
Yeah.
you fill your cup up, other as opposed to pouring it out. Yeah.
And I feel like just one last bit as well with what you said. It for me it is now just about like blocking, kind of like blocking those people out, so to speak. A bit like the solar eclipse, just going over, just blocking them out, and just talking and getting my gifts out to the world because I know that I can support and guide people with the way that I do things, and that's what I've got to
Hmm.
remember. It's the way that I do it. I don't have to be like, and you always there to have that friendly reminder. Like it's how I do things, you know.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what I've got
Right.
to keep reminding myself. Yeah. So thank you.
Hmm. All right. So I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for this. My first. I don't want to say I was nervous, but I'm just wanting to, get this out the way so I can move forward and do better. So I appreciate you being here.
No, it was. And like I say, even though thank you for mentioning the work that I do as well, but it's always good to be a student and not always a teacher
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it lands differently as well. And hearing it from someone else, even though it's similar things, but it just lands. I'm always up for being a student, as I am an actual teacher. So
Right. Right. I was thinking
yeah, no,
about that when I was saying all the teacher and being a guru and stuff. But yeah.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, no, thank you very much, much appreciated.
All
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
So this will close down this session. Then next week I'm going to be talking about the first quarter moon and what we need to expect for that. And if you're watching the replay of this, if you're interested in knowing what your spiritual gifts are and how you can make money with them, then the intake form for that is going to be in the description wherever this is posted. So I will see you guys next week and have an amazing solar eclipse.
Thank you.
All right.